Hey guys, hope you enjoyed this video with Saint Francis and Saint Thérèse Catholic Worker. All right. Please state your first and last name for the camera.
It's Scott Schaefer Duffy.
All right. So, how did you kind of get into the Catholic Worker movement?
Well, I was going to Holy Cross in the 70s, Holy Cross College here in Worcester, Massachusetts, and a professor of mine uh, wrote the introduction to one of the Catholic Worker books, and he introduced us to it and suggested I go down and visit the Mustard Seed Catholic Worker here in Worcester. So I did. I went down there. They had mass. It was in an old building, uneven floor, mixed match chairs, little card table for an altar. Uh, the congregation, a collection of homeless people, some of them sleeping, some of them not sober, and volunteers, a real mix of people. And Jim Connolly is a priest. He starts saying mass, and the middle of the mass, near the consecration, the somebody's outside the window starts yelling, "Let me in there! Let me in there! You call yourselves fucking Christians?" And he's screaming and yelling outside. And he threw a rock through the window, broke the window. The rock skitters in front of the altar. And then somebody behind me says, "I'll go talk to him," and goes outside. And the mass continues. And I'm like, whoa. I said, there's one thing I know for sure. This is not something I'm ever going to do. And I wasn't interested at all. I graduated from Holy Cross. That house that was the mustard seed burned down a few years later, and they rebuilt the present location. But I wanted to take religion seriously, and I wanted to do peace and justice work, and I wanted to not be one of these religious people that drives around in an expensive car, so on speak. So when I graduated from Holy Cross, I didn't really have many models of lay people doing anything. So I applied and was accepted to the Capuchin Franciscans, and I was a friar. I was a postulant for a year and a half, and then a novice. And they recommended me for vows. But I had a lot of misgivings, and I spoke to the provincial. I said I was really worried about uh, voluntary poverty. And the provincial said, "I've never had to forbid anybody from living too simply." And I said, "Well, it's true. I could go barefoot, just wear my habit, eat one meal a day." I said, "But I'd live in the most expensive uh, property in the country. I'd have access to a brand new car anytime I want. I'd never have to worry about where my next meal's coming from, my health care. The rest of my life, I'd have no anxiety." I said, "That doesn't strike me as voluntary poverty. It strikes me as asceticism. You have it, but you're deciding not to use it." And then I said, "What about peace work? Would you welcome me doing any peace work?" He said, "Yes." He said, "But you can't come out of the seminary like you know it all to people that have been priests for years. You got to do traditional work for a little while, build your reputation." I said, "Well, all right, that's reasonable. How long do you think it'd be after I was ordained before I could attend a demonstration?" I said, "I don't know, 10 years." And I'm only 21 at the time. And I said, "I don't know if I'd be the same person in 10 years." And so I spoke to my novice master, told him I was going to leave, and he said, "Well, why don't you take 2 years off? Come back if you want. 1 year, do human service work you've never done before, and the second year, go to a Catholic worker house." So I worked in a nursery school and a nursing home for a year, and then I wrote to various houses, and one wrote me in Washington D.C., and it was such a devastating letter about the poverty. I said, I've got to go and see it." I went down. I've never lived in a black neighborhood. I went down to DC. I got off the bus and my feet sank in the tar. It was so hot. And I went to the house. It was a little tiny house, St. Benedict's, with a woman's house two doors down. Mike Curran was the only volunteer, 42 homeless people.
Wow.
Yeah, it was wild. I'd never seen so many cockroaches and rats during the day. And I was like, whoa, this is going to test my commitment to poverty. And I sold everything. And 2 months later, I moved there. And a friend visited me 2 weeks after I arrived. And they said they were surprised. And I said, "Why?" I said, "I've never seen you so happy." And I did. I liked it. I met Claire there. We were married a year later in Washington. She was a Catholic worker as well. And after we got married, we moved back to Worcester. Ostensibly, we were going to do human service jobs and continue peace work as much as we could. But a year later, I was in jail and I met a man that was getting released at Christmas. He had nowhere to go. We took him in our apartment. And when we had him, we realized we really liked the combination of doing the works of mercy and doing peace work together, which the Catholic worker has. So we got three friends together and we talked about it for half a year and we founded this house. And we've been here for 39 years, I don't know, quite a while. And a lot of people have lived here for 6, 7, 8 years as volunteers. One person lived here until he died, and we buried him too. But it was a circuitous road. All roads are, but but I feel like it was good. People ask how long you're in the Catholic worker, and I said, well, as long as it feels like that's what God wants me to do. If God wants me to do something else, I'll do something else. But so far, this seems pretty good.
Hmm. And I know that it's a common theme throughout Catholic worker communities or houses, the demonstrations and protesting. You've already told me a couple stories of different ways you personally have protested or demonstrated, but do you want to go into a little bit more of how you got involved in that?
Well, when I was still a student at Holy Cross, I wrote a letter to the newspaper after they ran an article called Roll Out the Carpet for ROTC. And it was a puff piece, 1976, in between the Vietnam War and I said, look, you know, well, I know we're at peace now, but people going to the military should think about it. It's serious issues, and maybe there could be a war in the future. And I wrote a kind of a mildly critical letter. And a Marine Corps major wrote another letter at the same time saying he was glad to see the college newspaper overcome the Vietnam syndrome and write a good article. And they ran the two letters under a headline, ROTC, good for students and administration or opposed to Christian values,
Hmm.
which isn't exactly what I wrote. But there were 8 letters the next week of people attacking me as a pacifist.
Hmm.
I hadn't really thought about pacifism before. And I thought, well, these people, I don't agree with them. And I saw there were a lot of letters exchanged back and forth in the newspaper, including this major writing several times. And finally, Jimmy Carter reintroduced the registration for the draft. And I had a table in the campus center in the lobby with information for people about this, what their rights were. And this major came up to me. We had written back and forth in the paper, but I'd never met him. And he started talking to me, Major Townsend. He was a combat veteran. And I started talking to him. It was a good conversation. People gathered around because they had seen us in the paper, more and more people. Before you know it, there were 300 people gathered around, and we talked for 2 hours. And when we talked about theology or philosophy, I felt like I had the upper hand.
Hmm.
When he talked about experience in combat, there was no comparison. He had the upper hand. But it challenged me in nonviolence to take it seriously, to
Hmm.
find out ways in which to express nonviolence in difficult circumstances. So, both at the Catholic Worker, where we were trying to be nonviolent with people who are uh, intoxicated, angry, depressed, overcrowded, desperate, you know, was a challenge. But also looking at a country that spends $59,000 a second on its military when people don't have housing, that you have to combine these issues. You have to look at why are people homeless? Where are we wasting our money? Why do they not have health care and so on and so on? And so we did protests, we did vigils, we did fasts, uh, sometimes nonviolent civil disobedience. Uh, I've been jailed, I don't know, maybe 20 times.
Hmm.
And I've served about a year and a half of my life in jail. and my wife's been jailed many times too. But we also a friend of ours got an inheritance, and we heard a talk from somebody about the Sandinistas revolution in Nicaragua, and they said the babies don't cry there. And the Reagan administration was carrying out a campaign indirectly to overthrow that regime. And this friend's inheritance, we said we should go and see what this is about. And a theologian spoke at Catholic University and said when he was in Nicaragua, there was no fighting because he was there, because they knew he was an American. He said the whole month he was there was no fighting. And after the talk, Claire pushed through the crowd. Do you think that was because you were a celebrity? It would happen to any U.S. citizen? He said he thought it was any U.S. citizen. So we thought we'd go to Nicaragua, into the war zone, position ourselves, and act as sort of a peace team.
Mhm.
And we did. We went to northern Nicaragua, and we learned a lot about the situation. Uh, but there were flaws. It wasn't a complete answer. We could stand on the Sandinista side and prevent the Contra rebels from attacking them. But I thought, if we really want to be nonviolent, we should stop the Sandinistas from firing too. We should be in the middle. So I felt it was a little bit unsatisfactory. But I have led since then, or participated in about 18 other international
Mm.
campaigns in Bosnia, three times during that war, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Darfur, Sudan, and in Israel, Palestine, and Northern Ireland. So I've had experience with other activists, some who've won the Nobel Prize, and indigenous people on things that help and things that work. And so I have, and I've had the same kind of experience in the United States. Is that you do civil disputes, you go to jail, and you find an injustice in jail. You're locked up, but it's still injustice. And so we did demonstrated in jail, ended up in solitary, had fasts, and so it doesn't matter where you are, and it can be a call to justice, and try to respond creatively, and oftentimes it can be very successful. And I'll give you the one most dramatically successful event at our house in Washington D.C. Claire was one night was the only volunteer, and she was sleeping on a couch in the main room because we and several guests were sleeping on the couches because every bed was filled. And at midnight, a woman named Pat goes in the kitchenette and starts taking out pans, making noise. One of the other guests says, "Claire, can you make her stop? We're so sleepy." So she goes over and spoke to her, this woman, Pat, and Pat got angry and said, "You know, I'm sick and tired of you coming down here from your rich white family in Virginia." And her family really was quite well to do. And said, "To spend your year in the ghetto, and then you'll write your book and go out and make money." But you don't know what the first thing about what it means to be involuntarily poor, to carry it in your skin color. She said some really good things, but she was really angry. And at one point, one of the guests stepped forward, and uh, Pat went to hit them with a frying pan.
Mm.
And Claire got in the way, and she hit Claire. One of the guests went over to the payphone to call the cops, and Pat went over and grabbed the payphone and ripped the receiver off the wall. She was, you know, and I came over at 7 in the morning to see if Claire wanted to go to mass. And Pat stormed by, and I went inside. Claire's black and blue. She hit her a number of times over the night. People were crying. I'm like, whoa. And I didn't know exactly what to do, and was thinking about it. And then I said, the Trappist monks said that we can go there for a retreat anytime we want in Berryville, Virginia. Why don't we go take a day of prayer? So she agreed. We went to Virginia. That night, Pat came back to the woman's house, kicked in the front door. She had a big knife. She says, "Where is that white so and so?" To kill Claire. This
Mm.
is an aside note for you, for anybody, is if you get an urge in your life to take a retreat anytime, take it. We came back the next day. We got a call from St. Elizabeth Hospital. Pat was in the hospital, and apparently she had a history of violent um, psychiatric problems when she wasn't on meds. And we didn't know that. And we said, well, we'll come and visit her. Well, 2 days later, before we visited her, the hospital called again. They said they gave her a day pass and she didn't come back and they didn't know where she was. So we were a little worried she might be still in a rage and come by to attack Claire. We had a few extra volunteers around, but she never showed up. Well, a year and a half later, Claire and I are married. We're in Worcester, walking down Main Street. Claire's 8 months pregnant with our first child. Who do we see coming up the sidewalk? Yeah, it was Pat. I says, oh my gosh, maybe she's not going to recognize us. She goes, Claire, Scott, how are you? Claire goes, good. Pat says, where do you live? I said, around. And we, nice little conversation. We walk away. Claire was very concerned and started having nightmares of Pat hitting her in the abdomen and the baby dying. And a few days later, she's at the library, public library near closing, and she's in the stack of books, and Pat's at the other end. And Claire's of two minds. One mind, it says, run away, call the librarian, get some pepper spray, knock down the books, make a barricade. The other part says, love the enemy, forgive 7 times 7. Fear is useless. What's needed is trust. All these scripture quotes. She walks up to Pat very awkwardly. They start talking. Conversation gets pretty good. And finally, Claire says, I thought about that night you hit me. And I don't think it was right you hit me, but I think everything you said was true about racism and poverty. And at the end of the conversation, Pat says, how's the pregnancy going? Claire says, good. I'm doing a lot of walking. They say that helps with the labor. Pat says, you having any problems? And Claire said, well, I saw some swelling in my ankles today. Pat took her wrist and said, call the doctor right away. It could be a thing called preeclampsia, which is common in first pregnancies. And the only symptoms are high blood pressure, and which you can't feel, and swelling in the ankles. If you don't treat it, it can become toxemia and be very serious. Claire comes home, tells me this. I said, well, you had a prenatal visit 3 days ago. I don't think you need to check. And Pat, well, she's got mental issues. And she said, let's call the hospital. We called the hospital. They said, you don't have to come in. We went anyway. They checked her blood pressure. It was sky high. They admitted her to the hospital, had her lay on her side to try to lower the pressure for a day. It didn't work. They gave her Pitocin, induced labor. Our son was born in the intensive care unit. He's 6'6", red hair, 3 children. We've got 3 other children, 6 grandkids. The doctor heard the story. They said if Claire had not talked to Pat, she and my son would have died. So I think love the enemy, nonviolence. It isn't about some goody two shoes thing to others. It's about saving our own lives too. It's about an integrity and a happiness that we can't even imagine.
And speaking about children, people that have children within the Catholic worker, I always ask, um, would you say that it's difficult doing hospitality work or other work with children in the house growing up?
It's different. We did it as single people, and we ran a very crowded house. We've moderated it quite a bit here, and we had dinner with our guests and our children 6 nights a week, and one night a week we served upstairs and had a family night dinner with just the kids. So we allotted some time that was specifically for kids, and we read aloud to the kids. We did a lot of different things to adjust, but they were also like there was a real tough street woman that stayed with us for a year, Betty Hazard. Very, very tough. She adored my son Justin, just adored him. And we had a rule at the table: only one person could speak at a time. Our kids hated it because they had to wait, but they loved it because when they were talking, all the adults would listen. And one time we were having a discussion, 3 or 4 of us volunteers, about telling somebody they should go because they were difficult. My daughter comes in and says, "Oh, give them another chance." So it was kind of a. And one time I got a call from another shelter that said, we want to give you a warning. We had somebody stay here 2 weeks ago, and we know you've got children in that house, and this person is rather violent. And I said, well, I appreciate you letting me know, but he's been here about a week and a half, and we haven't had any problems. And some people, because they were children, their behavior was better,
Hmm.
and But regarding the kids, it's like we raised them as Catholics, but we told them when it comes to confirmation, it's up to you. You decide what you want. We want you to have a tradition as a basis, but we don't want to. We're not trying to brainwash you. We're pacifists. We're vegetarians, but you're your own people.
Mhm.
We're going to serve vegetarian meals when you're here, but you decide you want to eat meat later or whatever. That's up to you. And my one of my sons said at one point when he was 16, what would you say if I wanted to apply to West Point, military academy? I said, well, if you understood the consequences, if you were fully informed and it was deep in your conscience, I'd support you. And he looks at me, he says, how am I supposed to rebel against that? And I think that's a good thing. Our job as parents isn't to make carbon copies out of our kids, but to give them the tools so they can do the thing they're supposed to do that will make them happy, and then support them. You know, but it worked out pretty well. They all went to good schools. They all got great financial aid because of the intellectual environment here with the talks and reading aloud of different books. Our kids all did well in school. Two of them were valedictorians. Third one very close. And and they went to great schools. They graduated from college without debt. They all have their master's degree. You know, we can't complain. We're very happy. Six wonderful grandkids. Three of our kids are still pretty Catholic too, which is surprising these days. And so it worked for us. And in some ways, a married couple, as a volunteer, you're not as quick to go off. So it tends to be a little more stable. The Catholic worker houses, we know, with couples, they tend to stay longer, not
Mhm.
shorter, longer. And so that's a little side benefit too. Although Claire and I have enough differences that single members that have been part of the community never felt like it was a tag team, like the two of us would be,
Mhm.
you know, against them. Oftentimes they would agree with Claire too often. But yeah, so that's a little about the kids.
And so, throughout the past, I guess, over 40 years that you've been in the Catholic worker, um, for different houses that you've been in and this house currently, what are some of the services that you provide?
Well, we shelter single men and women here now, although we have had families on occasion. We had families, refugees from Central America and from Bosnia and Ukraine. But uh, we provide a sit down dinner. We provide a help yourself breakfast. We do laundry for our guests twice a week. Uh, we try to keep the rules to a minimum. No drinking, no drugs in the house, no smoking in the house. Uh, but we try to provide a comfortable and safe place for people as a step to their futures. We have two beds that we reserve for long-term guests that their situation is just not going to be resolved. And we had one person stay 8 years,
Mm.
one person stayed 9 till he died, and then the other beds we try to use on an emergency basis. We used to be able to place people 2 or 3 weeks in an apartment or something. Now it takes longer, but we've had as many as 6 or 7 guests at a time, which for us in Washington, D.C. would have been nothing, a small thing. Right now we have 3 guests, well, counting you two, 5 guests. But I think the important thing that I learned in Washington, D.C. is that even when we had 30 people sleeping everywhere, somebody would come to the door and ask for a place to stay. And we could look around and literally say, there's no room. We were like those the innkeeper that Jesus and Mary and Joseph go to and look for a place at Christmas, say there's no room at the inn, and they sleep in the stable. No matter how much you do, you're always going to be that innkeeper too. You're always going to have to say no because we cannot do it all. So it's important for people in the movement to realize, you know, that they're uh, They're signs, not saviors.
Mm.
They're pointing to the way rather than accomplishing it all by themselves. We're not gods. We're imperfect, and so whatever level people can do. Back in the colonial period, the Puritans used to hang a pineapple outside their house, a picture of a pineapple, and they kept one room empty in the house, and it was the Christ room. If somebody came by, their horse threw a shoe, they needed a place to stay, they'd take the stranger in,
Mm.
you know. And if every Christian family had a Christ room, there'd be no shelters. And they'd only have somebody in it about a third of the year. So in the Jewish tradition, they used to serve an extra place at the table, and that was for Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah. And if a stranger came, that was their
Mm.
seat, you know. So the hospitality is something that should be in the culture. Actually, there was a study done of children, of adults who sheltered Jews during the Holocaust, trying to, a sociological study looking at what things in their upbringing gave them the courage to make that dangerous choice. And they found three very unsurprising things. One was in their upbringing, they all had an early association with suffering, they were not protected from it. The second is hospitality was practiced in their homes.
Huh.
So they already knew that. But the third thing was really stunning. They were all encouraged to do public speaking. Now,
Huh.
that sounds weird, but the fact that they had a voice in front of others gave them confidence so public speaking was important. But giving the example that strangers are welcome and you're growing up helps you to feel comfortable when you're in the future generations to do the same sort of thing.
Huh. And how would you say that this Catholic worker house in particular, you've listed many ways already, but follows the path of Jesus?
Well, I mean, sometimes it's literal. Like one day, a friend came to visit us and he said, "Oh, you lock your door." Jesus wouldn't lock his door. So we took the lock off and it's been off ever since. It's like, so it's an ongoing thing to think about, how can we imitate Christ? What can we do? And I wrote a poem in high school, which one line just sticks with me over and over. You be the one who does what is right. Find it and do it. You must dare. And
Mm.
it's like you just think about it. What's the right thing to do? Give to those that beg of you. Don't worry about the morrow. We had a large donation given to us a few years ago. We gave more than half of it to other Catholic worker houses. It's like we could have said, "Oh, I can eat, drink, and be merry. This is going to provide for us forever." Well, in that story in Luke's gospel, the rich fool, he dies that very night, and where's your wealth going to go now? And but so it's an ongoing thing, and being in community with a bunch of people, you get crisis and situations, and you talk about it, and you say, "Well, what do you think Jesus would do?" And you try to figure that out as a group, and not in some kind of crazy fundamentalist way, but in an authentic way. And after each nonviolent action or each hospitality decision, we evaluate it and say, well, how can we do better in the next time? Like this house, for example, we felt uh, Christ and the Holy Spirit are part of creation. So we have a very environmental focus here. We have an electric car. Our heating system is heat pumps.
Mm.
We have solar panels on the roof. We have an organic garden in the backyard. We feed our guests, if we can, organic food, and we try to be somewhat responsible environmentally. We compost, but again, you know, we got a ways to go, and sometimes we learn from other houses things that they're doing that are creative that say, "Gee, we should do that too." And we receive about 30 Catholic worker newsletters, and I try to write back to send an email or call after I get each one to talk to other Catholic workers what I liked, because I think they like feedback. Everybody likes feedback. But it's nice. It's nice. There's a community not only of those that live here, but those that come to our weekly peace vigil, those that comes to the talk tonight, those that are in other communities. It's and then our parish. Claire and I are the lectors at mass at the local parish 2 days a week,
Hmm.
and so we're both in a running club, so we know people in a lot of contexts. And when one of us goes to jail or has something, there's a lot of people that know us and many hands. I was hit by a car and almost killed a few years ago. There was an outpouring that was almost embarrassing. I'm glad I was in a coma for half of it, but but so you're not alone. And when we have crises and other things, people will come. It's like the end of that movie, It's a Wonderful Life. I'm the richest man in town, and because he has friends.
And what would you say some of the struggles of running or being in a Catholic worker house is?
Oh, I don't know. Sometimes, you know, it's possible to get overwhelmed, but I think that has to do with the individual's discipline to keep all of the components active: prayer, peace work, service to the poor, community. All of those, if you let one become huge, overwhelming, you do one civil disobedience, you get arrested again and again, you end up with 4 or 5 charges backed up, and you're in jail for like ages. Uh, or you're doing silent prayer for 3 hours a day, and people are ringing the bell and you're ignoring it. Or you got so many homeless people, you can't even imagine joining a peace march.
Hmm.
You know, you have to kind of keep all of the balls in the air. And you also have to remember that when you sit down to read an Agatha Christie book, or to go to a movie you really like, or go to a concert, or go to the art museum, that's not time off. That's important time. That's important parts of your work too. And it's an affirmation that I'm not God, that God's in charge. I don't have to feel guilty that I'm at the beach, or dancing. And that it's not you go there to dance, you come back recharged. You're recharged by everything. All of the work is, if you balance it, it's not overwhelming. I mean, it can be, at different time, one time or another, an individual gets discouraged. Like in one point in Washington D.C., our house was really crowded, and a guy came to the door. I knew him, Earl. And he said, "Can I sleep?" And I said, "Earl, I can tell you there's no room." And he said, I was sleeping on the floor in the front hallway space. That's how narrow, jammed it was. He said, "What if I sleep down here with you?" And I said, "Well, Eamon Hennessy, the Catholic worker, used to say, it's always room for one more if you don't mind. You're not superstitious and don't mind sleeping 13 in a bed." So I said, "Okay." He laid down next to me. And it was a very narrow space. One blanket, he has like 2/3 of it on him. And after a few minutes, he's asleep. He rolls over, puts his arms around me. He says, "Shirley." That's his girlfriend. I said, "I'm not Shirley." And I push him back. He does it again. I says, "Earl, I'm not Shirley." Then he turns the opposite way and he starts farting. And finally I said, "Earl, I'm going to let you have this space." And I get up and I look around, and I decided I'm going to lay on top of the kitchen table.
Hmm.
I lay on the kitchen table. I pull a plastic tablecloth half over me. I go to sleep. It seems like it was 10 seconds later. I open my eyes, and one of the other guests is there asking me if I have money for car fare for him to go to an appointment. I come out of the house for morning prayer. Claire comes from the woman's house. We used to say it in the street corner because it was quieter than the house. And I said to her before prayer, I says, you give and you give and you give to these people. And then when you're really giving, what do? They don't sit down and say thank you. They ask you for more. I was discouraged. And Claire goes, "And isn't that exactly the way we respond to God?"
Hmm.
And I was like, "I hate you." Because, so sometimes your co-community member is right and they recognize it. And I could see it, I can say, "Oh, okay." I sit down and I say, I need, when I sit down to pray, I said, "These are the things I need you to do." check, check, check. And so uh, uh, it can be hard, but you know. I worked at Catholic Charities many years ago, and when I would, a lot of the guys that were with me were first generation Irish, heavy, heavy brogue. And when I would complain, it's really hot, and one of the guys would say to me, "Oh, and you think our Savior had a picnic on Golgotha?" And then another day, I was complaining about something. Something was really heavy we were carrying, and one guy says, "Second station, Scott falls for the first time." I says, "God, you guys lighten up." But they just had a total different concept about suffering,
Hmm.
than I had. They were like, "Wah, wah, wah." Okay, okay, all right, I'll go with the flow.
And what are some of your favorite parts about living or being in a Catholic worker house?
I love the diversity. It challenges my intellect, my sense of humor, my patience. I meet incredibly diverse people. Um, I feel very blessed in a lot of ways. I mean, I worked in restaurants and in a nursing home, and I like that work, but they were jobs that you did and you finished. Here, there's the lines are all blurred, and I don't feel like. Sometimes I feel like, gosh, the burden is very, very light. The yoke is easy, the burden is very light, and I feel like it's in some ways I feel some of the supporters write to us, "Oh, you people are so holy." I feel like, right, you have no idea how easy this is. I feel like I need to tell people, no, I'm very happy. I'm very content. It's, you know, not a big deal. NBD.
um, and if you kind of had a message to give society, what would that be?
Well, it's the message of my first book, Nothing is Impossible. I write a variety of stories about all kinds of different things. And all of them, the unifying thing is the message that, look, when your conscience tells you to do something that's risky, unpopular, your family won't like it, you're not sure how you can pay for it. But it seems like the right thing to do. Take the chance. Do it. Do it. Trust. Take a leap. And I feel like saying to people, faith is a leap into a pitch black, cold chasm with faith that the Lord of Light is going to catch you. And it happens. It happens over and over and over. It happens to us. And our house burned down once. We had $5 in the bank. 4 months later, we bought this house, cash, cash.
Wow.
We didn't appeal to any grants. We didn't appeal to the government or the institutional church. Individuals. Nobody got a tax deduction. We paid for this house cash. It's like it's unbelievable. So I tell people that uh, you don't have to do what we do, but our example hopefully can give you the courage to do the thing you're supposed to do. Dorothy Day used to say, the founder of the Catholic Worker, there's something that each one of us is called to do that no one else can do. And if we don't do it, it simply will not be done. And the
Hmm.
world will just lose. When I talk to audiences, I say to the group here, especially young people, I said, the only reason every single person in this room does not win the Nobel Peace Prize and get made a saint is because when we get the invitations, we say no. If we say yes, every single person in this room will be a spectacular, sparkling light, you know, and because we were created to be that and diverse too, different. And why not? Why not? Just, go for it. Why not? Why just, working to the, circle the drain, waiting to, to check out. So that's what I would say.
And do you have any other pieces of information that you feel is important for people to know about your Catholic worker house in particular, or the Catholic worker community as a whole?
Well, if you're interested, you can go online and you can write to any house. And they all will probably have email or a regular mail, and get information. And they're enormously diverse. There are Catholic worker farms, city houses, and there's a lot of variety. And go visit one. In A lot of people like Stanley Wisniewski went in the 30s to visit the New York Catholic worker. He said he was coming down to stay for a day. He stayed for 35 years. And it's not the kind of thing like religious orders. You take vows, go to jobs, you get a contract, you say you're going to work for the X amount of time. The Catholic worker, you stay while it feels right. And it's free. And there's not pressure, or there shouldn't be pressure. And even though I'm an Irish Catholic and guilt did build the Irish nation, guilt's not a good motivator. Stay because it's the right thing, because you feel happy. And if you contact this house or other houses, they will welcome you. And you may inspire the houses too. It's not just them giving wisdom to you. You may see something or offer something that's new that they decide to incorporate. So you might be contributing to the houses as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed this interview. If you did, make sure to hit that like button. If you have any suggestions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. If you enjoy these type of videos and want to keep seeing more, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and share copy link. Send it to all your friends. Have a blessed day.